Shipmates, I'm very sorry that I missed your last class on Moby Dick. You can't, thank you. But you can't imagine how I try to crawl from my bed to get here. You know what I mean? Because like to miss the last day of Moby Dick, that was painful for me. So we're going to try to. I know Mr. Mack came in here, did he, or no?
Yeah.
You know, and he did some work on it. But I'm going to spend a little time on it. Some of it might be similar review, but some of it might not be. But I want to make sure that we put a proper end on Moby Dick. Okay? You good? Hello? Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Okay, Miles. Yes, please, Miles. You need your book. Okay. All right. What I would like is for you all to open up. We're going to begin our little talk today with a couple of framing quotes. What? You say?
What?
Well, here's the point. I want to contextualize this little talk a little bit, okay? So, first thing I would like you guys to do is to open up to chapter 3. Open up to page 9, all right? Okay, and everything we're going to do in the next 2 minutes has to do with how I want you to think about the ending. Okay, so, Chief, where's your book?
Right here. I'm on Power Moby Dick.
Get to chapter 3. Now, I want to remind you, chapter 3 is where we see the painting for the first time on page 9. And if you remember, we talked about the idea that the painting in some ways is a stand-in for any like difficult text. Hello? Yeah. And like what you have to do to try to understand it. And I want to remind you what he said here on page 9. He says the following. He says this. And I guess I want to replace like the novel for the painting. He says this. Bottom of the page. Yet there was, we're on page 9. Yet there was a sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it, that it fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Now, I want you to write a note to yourself in the margin. Put like CF, ending. Okay, so because I want you to think about the ending as you read that sentence. Hey, look, what was it about the painting that was so difficult?
You couldn't picture what.
Yeah, it was hard to understand. It was inscrutable in some ways, right? Something inscrutable. And I'm going to even add ambiguous. Because he had like 3 different theories, if you remember. Not 3, maybe like 8. Different things like, oh, it's this, it's that, it's the other. Right? So that's one thing I want you to think about as we're thinking about the ending. All right, the next one I want to have you guys look at is chapter 32. Everyone turn to chapter 32. The very end. This is really important. So, you're going to look on. All right. Everybody turn to page 128. All right. Now, are you on page 128? Okay. And I want you to look. We didn't read this chapter together. I want you to look at the last sentence. This is very important to me in terms of, again, the ending. Take in your margin, right? CF, ending of novel. All right. Now, this book, this chapter is about cetology. What does that mean? Study of whales. That's right. And he lists all the different kinds of whales. And he tries to talk about their subcategories. It's just basically zoology. It's a kind of zoological chapter. Okay, you with me? And he tries to systematize them, right? That's what zoology is a lot of times, right? Like you try to arrange the order of living things. Yes? Right? Listen to what he says at the end. Okay? And this is, again, it's about the end of the book that I'm trying to get you to think. Here's what he says. But I now leave my cetological system standing thus unfinished. Even as the great cathedral of Cologne was left, with the crane still standing upon the top of the uncompleted tower. For small erections may be finished by the first architects. Grand ones, true ones, ever leave the copestone to posterity. God keep me from ever completing anything.
What's a draught?
Huh?
Oh.
What? Drought? Where are you?
It's the next sentence.
Oh, draft. It's an old-fashioned draft. Okay, listen. God keep me from finishing anything. look, what's he getting at? If something is complex, grand, sublime, true, what also is it?
Incomplete.
Incomplete. To complete something is to suggest that it's finite. Are you with me? Okay? So this whole idea of, let's call it seeming incompleteness. Or no simple closure. Right? Well, that's what I want you to think about when we think about the ending. Because one of the points I'm going to make today is like, the ending is unbelievably complicated and has all these different elements to it. It's hard to kind of simply put them in a nutshell. But, of course, what is this sentence basically saying then? Go ahead, Mikey.
I don't know. There's never going to be any closure.
Yeah, because it's too complicated for simple closure. Are you with me? All right, let's start here then. So, do you guys see what I'm doing? Like, this is what I want you to think about as we talk about the ending. All right, this idea of difficulty about understanding something complicated, the ambiguity that comes along with it, and a sense of kind of incompleteness sometimes, because there's too much going on. And the end of the book is like 1,000 things are happening at one time, which I'll say. All right, so let's start talking about that. All right, the first thing I want to. This is going to be on our test, by the way, so you might want to tune in. Ooh, look at everybody just perked up suddenly. Do you guys remember this word confluence? I introduced this earlier. Parts of the novel suddenly have this big confluence of elements, like things that have been introduced here, there, and everywhere, suddenly all come to one point. I'll remind you about a place. Do you guys recall the when Tashtigo falls inside the head of the whale? Right? We have so many things going on all at one time. The whale's head is a kind of womb. It's a kind of tomb. It's a sort of coffin. It's got runes all over it, so it's sort of Egyptian. It's sphinx-like. There's a kind of redemption or resurrection that happens. You remember? This is, but also it's like Plato's honey head, so it's about ideas and thoughts, which reminds us of that chapter 70 where Ahab wants to find out what's inside the whale, that is, what's down deep in the sea, with the deep ideas of the world. Are you following me? So those are moments of confluence, and I would say the end, okay, is like this. The end is one of those moments where we have all these things we've been talking about coming together in one moment. Like, so for instance, think about this for a minute. Do we have a coffin?
Yeah.
Did you just hear something? Do we have a coffin?
Yes.
We do. What does the coffin do, though? It's life-giving, isn't it? Cedric! Cedric! Behave yourself. What is the matter?
You have seen so much.
Brad's all bugging.
Brad's all buggy. What are you saying?
Brad's all bugging. He tried to dodge. He hit his head on the.
Oh, so you laugh at other people's misfortunes. That's nice.
He's laughing too.
Are you okay? Anything wrong with your head? More than
I mean,
usual? Okay.
Always.
Okay. Look, dial in here. Dial in. Now look. Now this is something you should have noticed, right? Okay. I'm just talking about like the presence of kind of a confluence. So there's a coffin, yes?
Yeah.
There's a coffin, but it's also a life buoy, isn't it? And it also is covered with something. What is it covered with?
Answers.
It's carvings of what? Queequeg's tattoos, and they are these deep thoughts, right? A treatise on how to attain truth and the whole cosmology. Remember that? It's all marked over, but they're indecipherable, just like hieroglyphics. Yes? Does that remind you of anything? Where do we see hieroglyphics? Like on pyramids, on sphinxes. The head of the whale is covered with markings, remember? And the head of the whale is also the receptacle of these deep things as well. So there's all these things coming together at one time. So that's what I mean by a kind of confluence. And I'm not even starting yet on all of the illusions that are present here. Okay, so we're going to get into some of those. Now, was the action at the end of the novel plain to you? I mean, there's a lot going on at the end.
Yeah.
All right, let me give you guys a quiz. You ready for this? Okay, so, you ready? What boat is Ishmael in the last chapter? Go. No, boat, not ship. In the very end, what boat? That's after he gets rescued. The very end, what boat is he in? Whose boat?
Ahab.
Ahab's. What boat is he normally in?
He's on the regular ship.
What boat is he normally in? Think. You know this. Whose boat does he usually... Starbucks with Queequeg, right? Why is he in Ahab's boat? Do you remember this? Why is he in Ahab's boat when he's normally in Starbucks' boat?
Didn't he volunteer?
No. That's later. Why is he in the boat? He's in the boat because someone from that boat is now gone. Who would that be? No. Fadala. Fadala died a couple days ago, right? You with me? So they needed a replacement. They get Ishmael, right? So he's in that boat, and that's the last boat that's out, right? And as Rachel, Kara mentioned, he falls overboard, although he's not mentioned by name. Did you notice that's just like a couple of guys fall over, two swim back on and get on, one, who knows who he is. But then where do we find out what happened to him? Where do we find out what happened to him?
No. In the epilogue.
One more time. Where?
When you see the...
Okay, answer the question.
In the epilogue.
In the epilogue, right, that last little paragraph, we go, oh, he was drifting away on his own, would have probably drowned, but for the fact that everyone else drowned, and boop, what saved him? The coffin came up, right? Now, how about this? What are the two hearses?
Oh, the whale.
Raise your hand. What if you know? What's the two hearses? Go. The Pequod is the one not Native American. Native American wood, right? What's the other one? The whale. Whose body is the whale bearing? Fadala's. Remember, Fadala's all strapped to the whale by all those lines above the harpoon. Very good. How about this? How were we told that Ahab only could die? Hemp. How does he die? Don't say hemp. How does he die? Yes, that's right. His harpoon line gets caught around his neck, and out he goes. What happens to the Pequod?
It gets rammed by Moby Dick.
It gets rammed by Moby Dick and it sinks, right? What happens to every other person?
They
How?
They drown.
How? Say it.
They get pulled down with the boat.
Yeah, the boat kind of creates this big kind of whirlpool effect, right? And everybody gets sucked in, except it says Ishmael was getting dragged in, but by the time he got there, it had dispelled itself, right? And he's rescued by the Rachel who was searching, right? Woo! Lots of stuff going on. Now hold on though. There's a couple more details. Three of the ships, or the boats, get smashed up by Moby Dick, and those men go back on board. Where do the three harpooners end up? The three pagan harpooneers. Where are they in the very end of the boat? Of the book? They're on the mastheads. Tash, Queequeg, and Dagu are up top, right? Watching what's going on, right? Very good. Now, Ahab's last command to Tashtigo is for him to do what? It's strange. Nail the flag. It had come loose. He said, nail that flag. Right? Remember this? And then there's that weird moment at the very, very end. What happens with the flag? Speak in sentences.
The bird, eats it and tears it up. And
You're on the right track.
He nails the bird.
He does, while he's trying to nail the flag, he kind of pins the bird for a minute, and then what happens?
Drags it down with it.
The flag kind of wraps around the bird, and then poof, down they go. This is like weird. Now look, readers, if you want to be a good reader, like a good novelist, when he gives you something so strange, what should you say to yourself?
This was the quote about...
What should you say to yourself when you see something really weird?
There's something deeper than
There's something going on here. We need to understand this, right? So that's the action. Now I will just like to say this, and this will be another thing on test. Ooh, hey. One of the things that you need to think about with this novel is the fact that in the end, right, all these strange prophecies we've been hearing about suddenly kind of come true. And that's not just nifty, that's also related to something thematic, which is right from the get-go, we're wondering why anything in the world ever happens, right? Like what controls the world, right? Is there free will? You remember that chapter called The Mapmaker?
Yeah.
Where Ishmael's like, oh, it's this convergence of necessity, free will, and chance that makes things happen. You guys remember that? But then in other chapters we see Ahab raising his hand and saying what? Is Ahab? Is it I, God, or who that raises this arm? Right? So the whole book, one of the big topics in the book is what is in charge of the world? Who runs the world? Right? And one is, well, this is interesting. The end kind of suggests there is some grand design at the end, right? So that's point number one I'd like to make about the endings. The prophecies seem to comment on that whole issue. Do you guys follow me? Good. Now, dos. But of course, let's not forget the prophecies also relate to this conversation we've been having about Shakespeare, right? Remember this whole idea of like the Macbeth in the air. Do you guys remember this? Hello?
Yeah.
Remember Macbeth and his prophecies? Yeah, go, Kara.
What do you mean by rev?
The
Oh.
plot
Resolution.
review. That's what we just did. We reviewed the plot. Yeah. Thank you, Kara. All right. Now look, here's the next thing I want to talk about. I wonder how many of you noticed how many biblical allusions there was at the very end. Yes?
Yeah.
And maybe Mr. Mack kind of addressed some of this, but one of the things, I have a prop for you. Hold on. Uh-oh. It's broken. The prop is broken a little bit. This is, somebody made this some years ago. It's kind of cool. But here's this. Imagine this one's here. Look, you see this? Like, what are these things?
Crosses.
What are these things?
Crosses.
No, they're not crosses. They're mastheads,
Oh.
right? The very last moment in the novel looks something like this. Except, what else is on these mastheads? Men, right? There are men, 3 men on 3 crosses. Ooh. Hey, do you remember what day we set sail? Christmas Day. What day is this?
Easter Sunday.
No!
Oh, wait, no, Good
It's,
Friday.
what is it?
I'm
It's
sorry.
Good Friday. Are you with me? Coincidence?
I think not.
Well, I don't think so either. Not especially when you remember this.
Wait, did they say it was Good Friday?
No. My point is like this image. Like we said this to ourselves back in the day, right? Back I think in chapter 21. Like it can't be accidental that the ship set sail on Christmas Day. That seems very odd. Especially when you regard this. What does Ahab look like the first time we see him? He has a crucifixion in his face, Camden. And remember when he goes down below and talks, what does he complain about with his head? He's got like a crown that's digging into his skull. Do you guys remember this? And remember it was the crown of Lombardy, which was made with what? One of the nails. Yes, Camden, you're red hot today. One of the nails from the cross. So over and over again. And also, oh look, like doesn't he have a kind of 40-day experience? Remember he complains 40 years, 40 years, 40 years. Remember this? That's very like biblical, those numbers. Jesus, remember he fasts for 40 days in the wilderness before he's tempted. You guys all remember all this stuff? Hello? And of course, that's just in the symphony. That's just before these 3. How many day chase? 3-day chase.
Yeah.
All these things are adding up to a kind of Christ parallel. Never mind the fact, if you remember, that earlier in the novel, Ishmael says something curious about him. He says, to that crazy old man, the whale represented all the evil man has experienced, right? And what's he determined to do? Destroy it, right? Like that's, yeah, so what I want you guys to think about is, this is very interesting because there's something heroic about Ahab. I had this is for you, Brad. Brad Crawford, class of 01. We were reading this together, and one of the things, and he was a young man who studied the Bible. I think he was a boy at Sunday school. He noticed something. Ahab's last words. Do you remember what they are? Like if you know anything about the Christian church, Jesus' last words are very important, right? Forgive them, Father. I know not what they do. They know what they do. I thirst. Thus do I give up my spirit. That's another one when he's about to die. Do you know what Ahab says? When he's about to throw the spear, thus do I give up my spear. Ooh, that's moolah, isn't that good? Thus do I give up my spear, thus do I give up my spirit. Again, that seems awfully close to be just coincidental to me. 2 men, their last words, who have been set up as a kind of parallel all along this novel. Capiche? So listen, look, this is what I was trying to get at.